The pistol shot echoed through the canyon just as Katherine turned 23, though she would not know it was her birthday for several more hours, having lost track of the days since the stage robbery that left her stranded in the New Mexico territory with nothing but the torn dress on her back and a locket containing her mother's photograph. Grace stumbled over loose rocks as she made her way down the dusty trail, her throat parched and her lips cracked from 2 days without water. The October sun beat down mercilessly on her auburn hair, now matted with dirt and sweat. She had been traveling from Missouri to California to meet her intended husband, a merchant she had never met but who had corresponded with her father before his death 6 months prior. The arrangement had seemed like her only option after the bank foreclosed on their small farm, leaving her with nowhere to go and no family to turn to. Her mother had died of influenza when Grace was just 17, and her father had worked himself into an early grave trying to keep their land. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze in terror. More bandits, perhaps, coming back to finish what they had started. But as the rider came into view around the bend, she saw it was a single man on a chestnut mare, dressed in worn leather chaps and a dusty hat that shaded his face. He reined in his horse abruptly when he spotted her, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle at his saddle. "Madam," his voice was deep but cautious. "You all right?" Grace tried to speak but found her voice came out as barely a croak. The world tilted sideways and she felt her knees buckle. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. When Grace opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small but tidy room. The walls were rough-hewn logs, and sunlight streamed through a window covered with clean muslin curtains. A patchwork quilt covered her, and she realized with a start that someone had cleaned the worst of the dirt from her face and hands. Her dress, though still torn, had been brushed clean. "You are awake." The voice came from the doorway, and Grace turned to see the man who had found her. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. Concern etched his features as he approached with a tin cup. "Water," he said simply, helping her sit up and holding the cup to her lips. "Slow now." "Not too much at once." Grace drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she managed. "Where am I? My ranch. About 15 miles north of Concord. Name is Warren Spencer." He set the cup on a small table beside the bed. "Found you on the North Trail. You have been unconscious for near about 6 hours. 6 hours?" Grace struggled to sit up fully, alarmed. "I must go. I need to get to California, to San Francisco. My betrothed is expecting me." Warren held up a hand. "Madam, you are in no condition to go anywhere. Besides, it will be dark soon. Whatever happened to you, you need rest and food before you go anywhere." Grace felt tears sting her eyes as the reality of her situation crashed over her. "The stage was robbed 3 days ago. They took everything. My trunk, my money, even the small bag I carried. They killed the driver and the guard. I managed to hide behind some rocks, and when they left, I started walking. I do not even know which direction I was going." Warren's expression darkened. "The Dalton gang. They have been hitting stages on that route for 2 months now. Sheriff cannot seem to catch them." He pulled up a simple wooden chair and sat down. "You are lucky to be alive, Miss Grace Katherine." She pulled the quilt tighter around herself. "I had nothing of value, just my belongings and the fare my father saved for my journey west." "Your father, he died in spring. The bank took our farm in Missouri. I had nowhere else to go, so I accepted a marriage proposal from a merchant in San Francisco. We corresponded through letters, though we have never met." Warren was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. "That is a hard road." "It is the only road I have." Grace blinked back tears. "And now I cannot even travel it. I have no money to book another stage passage, no way to send word that I am delayed." "We will figure something out," Warren said, standing. "But first, you need to eat. Can you stand?" Grace nodded and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Warren politely turned away as she stood, swaying slightly. He offered his arm without looking at her, and she took it gratefully. He led her through a short hallway into a larger room that served as both kitchen and living area. The space was simple but clean, with a sturdy table, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with supplies. Through the window, Grace could see a barn and several corrals in the fading light. "Sit," Warren said, pulling out a chair. "I have stew on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it will fill your stomach." As he ladled thick beef stew into a bowl, Grace looked around the room. Everything spoke of a solitary life, carefully maintained but lacking the touches a woman would bring. No curtains beyond the muslin in the bedroom, no decorations save for a single photograph on the mantel of a stern-looking couple. "Your parents?" she asked, nodding toward the photograph. Warren glanced at it as he set the bowl before her. "Yes, they started this ranch 30 years ago. My father died of a heart attack 5 years back. My mother followed him 6 months later. Doctors said it was pneumonia, but I think it was a broken heart. I am sorry." Grace took a spoonful of the stew, and despite her distress, she found she was ravenous. "This is very good. Thank you." Warren sat across from her with his own bowl. "I have had a lot of practice cooking for myself. Never was much good at it until I had to learn." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Grace spoke again. "You live here alone, no hired hands, cannot afford them anymore. Cattle prices have been dropping, and I lost a good portion of my herd to rustlers last year. I manage with what I have, but it is hard work for one man." He studied her face in the lamplight. "What day were you supposed to arrive in San Francisco?" 3 weeks from yesterday, if all had gone well." Warren nodded slowly. "The stage runs through Concord twice a week. Next one comes through in 5 days. If you want, I can take you into town, see if the sheriff has any news about the robbery, maybe help you send a telegram to your intended." Grace felt a surge of gratitude. "You would do that for a stranger, madam, out here. We help each other or we do not survive. It is as simple as that." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "You can stay in the spare room as long as you need. It was my sister's room before she married and moved to Denver. I cannot impose on you like that. I have no way to pay you for your kindness." Warren turned to face her, his expression serious but kind. "I am not asking for payment. You have been through an ordeal and you need time to recover. We can sort out the rest later." Grace felt tears threaten again, overwhelmed by this stranger's generosity. "I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything. Just rest." He hung the pot back on its hook. "There is a wash basin in your room and clean water in the pitcher. I put out one of my mother's old dresses for you. It might be a bit large, but it is better than what you have on." As Grace stood to return to her room, a thought struck her. "What is today's date?" Warren consulted a calendar hanging on the wall. "October 15th, 1887. Grace felt her heart sink. "It is my birthday." Warren turned to look at her, surprise crossing his features. "Today," she nodded, unable to keep the sadness from her voice. "I am 23 years old today. Last year my father made me a special dinner, even though we could barely afford it. We had roast chicken and a small cake. It was the last birthday I thought I would ever spend alone." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose I was wrong." Warren was quiet for a long moment, then he walked to a cupboard and pulled out a jar. "My mother used to make preserves every summer, Peach was her specialty. I have been saving this last jar for something special. He set it on the table along with 2 spoons. It is not a cake, but it is sweet, and nobody should be alone on their birthday. Grace stared at the jar, then at this kind stranger who had already done so much for her. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat together at that simple table, sharing preserved peaches by lamplight, and for the first time in months, Grace felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. Warren told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the time his sister convinced him to put a frog in their mother's bread box. Grace found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since her father died. "Your sister sounds wonderful," she said, licking peach syrup from her spoon. "She is. Sarah writes every month. She is happy in Denver with her husband and their 2 children." Warren smiled, but there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. "I miss her, but I am glad she found a good life." "And you? You never thought of marrying?" Warren was quiet for a moment. "I was engaged once, 3 years ago. Elizabeth was the daughter of the man who owns the mercantile in Concord. We had known each other since we were children." He stared into the jar. "But when my father died and the ranch started struggling, her father convinced her that she could do better. She married a banker from Santa Fe 6 months later." "I am so sorry," he shrugged, but Grace could see the old hurt in his eyes. "It was for the best, I suppose. If she could not stand by me when things got hard, she would not have been happy here anyway. But it made me cautious about trusting my heart to anyone again." Grace understood that feeling all too well. "Is that why you are still alone?" "Partly. Mostly it is just that running this ranch does not leave much time for courting. I am up before dawn and working until after dark most days. Not many women want that kind of life." He looked at her directly. "What about you? If you had a choice, would you be traveling to marry a stranger?" The question caught Grace off guard. She had not allowed herself to think about it in those terms. "I do not know. My father arranged it before he died, and I gave my word. A woman alone has few options, especially with no money and no family. At least this way I will have security. But not love. Love is a luxury I cannot afford." Even as she said the words, Grace felt their weight. "My mother married my father for love, and they were happy, but they were also poor. When she died, my father could barely function. It took him 6 years to work himself to death from grief and exhaustion. Sometimes I think it would be easier not to love that deeply." Warren reached across the table and gently took her hand. The gesture was simple and kind, not presumptuous. "I think it would be a sadder life, not an easier one." Grace looked down at his hand covering hers. His palm was calloused from hard work, his fingers strong but gentle. She felt something shift inside her, a feeling she could not quite name. "Perhaps you are right." They sat like that for a moment longer before Warren withdrew his hand and stood. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch if you feel up to it. The work will still be there, but it can wait a bit." Grace nodded and made her way back to the small bedroom. She found the dress Warren had mentioned, a simple blue calico that smelled faintly of lavender. After washing as best she could with the basin and water provided, she changed and climbed into bed. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw and surprisingly comfortable. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, Grace thought about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been alone and desperate, certain she would die in the desert. Tonight she was safe, fed, and had been shown more kindness by a stranger than she had experienced in months. She thought about Warren's words about love and sadness. Was he right? Was a life without deep love sadder than the pain that came with it? Her parents had loved each other fiercely, And yes, her father's grief had destroyed him, but Grace could not deny that their love had also brought them years of joy and companionship. Would she trade away the possibility of that kind of connection for mere security? Sleep claimed her before she could find an answer. The next morning, Grace woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in the calico dress, which was indeed too large but serviceable, and found Warren already at the stove, cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks, truth be told." Grace moved to help him, instinctively taking over the task of flipping the bacon. "You do not have to wait on me. I can earn my keep while I am here." Warren looked like he might protest, then nodded. "Fair enough. Though I meant what I said about you being a guest." They worked together in easy silence, and Grace was surprised at how natural it felt. Soon they were seated at the table with plates of bacon, eggs, and thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. "After breakfast, I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture," Warren said. "If you would like to come along, I can show you the property. Or you are welcome to rest here if you prefer." "I would like to see it," Grace said immediately. She had spent too much time being idle in recent months, waiting for her fate to be decided by others. The idea of being outside, doing something active, appealed to her greatly. Warren's face lit up with a smile that transformed his serious features. "Good. I will saddle up 2 horses after we finish eating." An hour later, Grace found herself mounted on a gentle bay mare named Daisy, following Warren across the scrubland toward the distant pasture. She had learned to ride as a girl on her father's farm, though she had not been on a horse in over a year. The familiar rhythm came back quickly, and she found herself relaxing into the saddle as they rode. The land stretched out around them in shades of brown and gold, broken by dark green juniper trees and the occasional splash of late-blooming wildflowers. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warm day. The sky was an impossible blue, vast and endless. "It is beautiful," Grace said, and meant it. "It is hard land," Warren replied, "but yes, it has its moments. My father used to say that anyone who could make a living out here had to love it because the money sure was not reason enough." They rode for another 20 minutes before reaching a pasture where about 50 head of cattle grazed peacefully. Warren dismounted and walked among them, checking for signs of illness or injury. Grace watched him work, noting the gentle way he approached the animals, the practiced efficiency of his movements. "You really do this all yourself?" she asked. "Most days." Warren ran his hand along a cow's flank, checking her condition. "During roundup and branding, I hire on some day workers from town, but otherwise, yes, it is just me." "That must be lonely." Warren looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "It is, but it is also honest work, and this land has been in my family for 3 decades. I cannot imagine giving it up, even when things get hard." Grace thought about her own lost farm, about how her father had clung to it until his dying day despite the futility. She had resented his stubbornness then, angry that he would not sell while they could still get something for it. But watching Warren among his cattle, she began to understand. It was not just land and animals. It was legacy and purpose and belonging. They spent the rest of the morning riding the property. Warren showed her the stream that provided water for the livestock, the small garden plot where he grew vegetables, the barn where he stored hay and equipment. He talked about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to improve the breed of his cattle, how he hoped to dig a proper well closer to the house. His voice came alive when he spoke of these dreams, and Grace found herself caught up in his enthusiasm. "You really love it here," she said as they paused to let the horses drink from the stream. "I do." Warren looked out over the land, his expression softening. "It is in my blood, I suppose. My father used to say that once you have spent enough time out here, the silence gets inside you. You start to need it the way other people need conversation." Grace understood that feeling more than she would have expected. The vast quiet of the landscape was different from the lonely silence of her father's house after her mother died. This silence felt full of possibility rather than empty with loss. As they rode back toward the house, Grace noticed storm clouds gathering in the west. Warren saw her looking and nodded. "We will get rain tonight. Good for the grass, but it will make the roads into town muddy for a few days." "Does that mean we cannot go to Concord? We will have to wait until the roads dry out a bit." "Another 2 or 3 days probably." He glanced at her. "Is that all right? I know you are anxious to send word to your betrothed." Grace was surprised to find that the delay did not bother her as much as it should have. "It will have to be, I suppose. A few more days will not make much difference at this point." That evening, as promised, the rain came. It started as a gentle patter after dinner, but soon built into a proper downpour. Grace and Warren sat by the fire, listening to the drumming on the roof. Warren had pulled out a worn deck of cards, and they played hand after hand of gin rummy, keeping score on a scrap of paper. "You are quite good at this," Warren said as Grace won her 4th hand in a row. "My father and I used to play every evening after supper. He said it kept his mind sharp." Grace shuffled the cards for another deal. "I miss those evenings. Just the two of us, playing cards and talking about our days." "What would you talk about?" "Everything." "Nothing. He would tell me about the work he had done. I would tell him about the garden or the chickens. Sometimes we would talk about my mother, remembering her together." Grace dealt the cards with practiced ease. "Other times we would just play in silence. It was comfortable, you know, not needing to fill every moment with words." Warren nodded, studying his hand. "I know exactly what you mean. That is the best kind of companionship, I think. When you can be quiet together without it being awkward." They played another hand, and Grace found herself studying Warren when he was not looking. He had a good face, she decided. Strong but kind, with smile lines that suggested he had not always been so serious. She wondered what he had been like before his father died, before his fiancée left him, before the weight of running the ranch alone had settled on his shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" Warren asked, catching her looking at him. Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking that you seem like you carry a lot of weight. We all carry something." Warren laid down his cards, showing a winning hand. Grace groaned good-naturedly. "What do you carry, Grace Katherine?" The question was gentle but direct. Grace set down her own cards and stared into the fire. "Guilt, I suppose, that I could not save my father's farm, that I let him work himself to death, that I agreed to marry a man I do not know instead of finding another way. None of that is your fault. Maybe not, but I still feel it." She looked at him. "Do you feel guilty about your father, about not being able to save the ranch from struggling?" Warren was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. I know it does not make sense. Market forces and rustlers are beyond my control. But yes, I feel like I have failed him somehow. Like I should be doing better. But you are doing your best. So were you." Warren reached across the small table and took her hand again, as he had the night before. "We can only do what we can do, Grace. The rest is in God's hands, I suppose." Grace looked down at their joined hands and felt that same strange shift in her chest, that unnamed feeling growing stronger. "When did you get so wise, Warren Spencer?" he laughed, a rich sound that filled the small room. "I am not wise. I am just repeating things my mother used to tell me when I was feeling low. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was. You would have liked her. She was kind and practical and had no patience for self-pity, even though she certainly had cause for it sometimes. Warren squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. She would have liked you too. She always said I needed someone who could beat me at cards. The rain continued through the night, and Grace fell asleep to its steady rhythm. She dreamed of the ranch, of riding across the scrubland under that vast blue sky, but in her dreams, she was not alone. Warren rode beside her, and somehow, in the way of dreams, it felt like coming home. The next 3 days fell into an easy rhythm. Grace would wake early and help Warren with breakfast. Then they would work together on various tasks around the ranch. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens, to milk the 2 cows Warren kept for dairy, to tend the vegetable garden. In the afternoons, they would ride out to check on the cattle or repair fencing. In the evenings, they would cook dinner together, play cards, and talk. Grace learned that Warren loved books but rarely had time to read. She discovered that he played the harmonica, though he was shy about it. She found out that his favorite meal was his mother's pot roast, which he had never quite managed to replicate. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's flower garden, about the time she convinced her father to let her drive the wagon to town and promptly got them stuck in a ditch. With each passing day, the thought of leaving for California felt more and more like a distant obligation rather than a real plan. Grace knew she should be anxious to get to Concord, to send her telegram, to continue her journey. But instead, she found herself hoping for more rain, for more delays, for more time in this peaceful place with this kind man. On the 4th morning after her arrival, Grace woke to find the sun shining brightly and the roads visibly drier. Warren was already up making coffee. "Looks like we can get to Concord today if you want," he said, though his tone was oddly reluctant. "Roads should be passable." Grace felt her heart sink. "I suppose we should go then." Warren nodded but did not quite meet her eyes. "I will hitch up the wagon after breakfast." They ate in unusual silence, the easy conversation of recent days seeming to have dried up along with the roads. Grace helped clean up, then went to change into her original dress, which Warren had cleaned and mended as best he could. The blue calico had been comfortable, and she was reluctant to take it off. It felt like she was shedding more than just a borrowed dress. The ride into Concord took about 2 hours. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with a mercantile, a saloon, a hotel, a doctor's office, and the sheriff's office. Warren pulled the wagon up in front of the latter. Sheriff Tom Randall was a weathered man in his 50s with a gray mustache and sharp eyes. He listened to Grace's account of the stage robbery with a grim expression. "Same gang that has been hitting the routes for months now," he confirmed. "We have gotten close a few times, but they seem to know these hills better than we do. I am sorry for your loss, Miss Katherine. Afraid we have not recovered any of the stolen property." Grace had expected as much, but the confirmation still stung. "Is there a way I can send a telegram to San Francisco? I need to contact my intended and let him know I have been delayed." The sheriff directed them to the telegraph office, and Grace composed a brief message to Harold Whitmore, the merchant she was supposed to marry. She kept it simple, explaining that she had been robbed and would be delayed but hoped to resume her journey soon. The cost of the telegram took almost all of the small amount of money Warren had lent her. He should receive it by tomorrow, the telegraph operator assured her. "Any reply will come here to the Concord office." As they left the telegraph office, Warren touched her elbow gently. "There is something else we need to discuss. You will need money for stage fare and you cannot travel in that torn dress." Grace felt shame heat her cheeks. "I know. I was hoping that perhaps I could find work here in town for a few weeks, earn enough for passage." "What kind of work?" "I can cook clean, so Surely someone needs help. Warren looked troubled. Grace, I have a different proposal. Hear me out before you say anything. He took a deep breath. Come back to the ranch, stay there and help me run it. I can pay you a fair wage for your work, and you can save up for your passage. You are already learning the tasks, and honestly, having help would make a real difference. In a few months, you would have enough for the stage and some money to start your new life in San Francisco. Grace stared at him, torn between hope and propriety. Warren, I cannot live alone with you on your ranch. My reputation would be ruined. I thought of that. Mrs. Chen in town runs the boarding house. She is widowed and could use the extra income. What if she came to stay as well? She could have the spare room and you could share my sister's old room. It would all be proper and above board. Before Grace could respond, a woman's voice called out behind them. Warren Spencer, is that you? They turned to see a well-dressed woman in her late 20s approaching. She was beautiful in a polished way, with blonde hair carefully arranged under an expensive hat. A man in a fine suit walked beside her. Warren's expression went carefully neutral. Elizabeth, John. The woman smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. I had heard you were still managing out at your father's place. How is that going? Well enough. Warren's tone was polite but cool. Elizabeth's gaze shifted to Grace, taking in her mended dress and sun-weathered face with barely concealed disdain. And who is this? Grace Katherine. She is staying at the ranch temporarily. Grace, this is Elizabeth and John Morrison. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. Staying at the ranch, how modern of you, Warren. Grace felt Warren tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped forward and extended her hand. I am helping Mr. Spencer with ranch work in exchange for room and board. It is a business arrangement while I save funds for my journey to California. Elizabeth's smile turned sharper. Of course it is. Well, it was lovely to see you, Warren. John and I must be going. We have an appointment with the banker. She paused. You know, if you ever need advice about selling the ranch, John has excellent contacts in Santa Fe. There are investors always looking for land. I will not be selling, Warren said firmly. Never say never, dear. Elizabeth patted his arm in a condescending manner. Running a ranch alone is so difficult. I am sure you will see reason eventually. She and her husband walked away, leaving Warren staring after them with a tight jaw. Grace touched his arm gently. That was her, your former fiancée. Yes. Warren seemed to shake himself. Sorry you had to witness that. Elizabeth has always had a gift for making her point in the most cutting way possible. She is wrong, you know, about the ranch. You are doing well and it will get better. Warren looked down at her and some of the tension left his face. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for what you said to her. That was quick thinking. Grace smiled. I meant it. If you truly want my help, I would be glad to give it, and if Mrs. Chen is willing to come stay as chaperone, then I accept your offer. Warren's face lit up with genuine joy, so different from the polite mask he had worn with Elizabeth. Really? You will stay, for a few months at least, until I have enough saved for my journey. Even as she said the words, Grace felt a pang at the thought of eventually leaving. She pushed it aside. This was a practical arrangement, nothing more. They found Mrs. Chen at her boarding house, a tidy establishment on the edge of town. She was a petite woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. When Warren explained the situation, she listened carefully. You need a chaperone so Miss Katherine can work on your ranch without scandal, she summarized. And you can pay me room and board plus a small wage. Yes, madam. The room is comfortable and you would have your own space. Grace is an excellent cook, so the meals would be good. It would just be for a few months. Mrs. Chen looked at Grace appraisingly. You are the girl who was robbed by the Dalton gang. Yes, madam. And you are betrothed to a man in California. Yes, madam. Mrs. Chen turned back to Warren. You understand that this arrangement, even with me present, will cause talk. I do. But I also know that Grace needs honest work and I need honest help. People can talk all they want. The older woman smiled slightly. Good answer. Very well, Mr. Spencer. I accept your offer. Give me 2 days to arrange things here and I will join you at the ranch. As they rode back toward the ranch in the wagon, Grace felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. She had bought herself time, postponed the inevitable journey to marry a stranger. But she had also committed herself to months of living in close proximity to Warren, a man she was finding more appealing with each passing day. It was a dangerous arrangement for her heart, but she could see no better alternative. Thank you, she said quietly as the ranch came into view, for the work and for caring about my reputation. Warren glanced at her. You do not need to thank me. This helps both of us. And besides, I could not send you off alone to who knows what. My mother would come back and haunt me. Grace laughed, and the tension between them eased. Well, we cannot have that. Tell me more about these tasks you need help with. They spent the evening planning how the work would be divided once Mrs. Chen arrived. Grace would handle the household tasks like cooking, cleaning, and laundry, as well as the garden and chickens. She would also help Warren with the cattle when needed. It would be hard work, but Grace found she was looking forward to it. She had spent too long being idle and helpless. The idea of being useful again appealed to her. 2 days later, Warren returned from town with Mrs. Chen and her modest belongings. The older woman surveyed the ranch house with an approving eye. Clean and well-maintained, she pronounced. That is good. I will take the small room, Miss Katherine. You keep the larger one where you have been staying. That evening, the 3 of them shared dinner together. Mrs. Chen told stories of her late husband, who had been a surveyor for the railroad, and her 2 daughters who had moved back east to find better opportunities. Grace talked about Missouri and her father's farm. Warren was quieter than usual, but he smiled often as he listened to the women talk. After dinner, Mrs. Chen excused herself early, claiming fatigue from the journey. Grace and Warren found themselves alone by the fire, though the older woman's presence in the house changed the dynamic slightly. They were more formal with each other, more careful. This was a good idea, Grace said, breaking the slightly awkward silence. Having Mrs. Chen here, it makes everything proper. Yes, Warren poked at the fire with an iron rod. Though I confess I liked it better when it was just us. Is that wrong of me to say? Grace's heart skipped. No. I felt the same way, but this is how it needs to be. Warren looked at her directly, his expression serious. Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. This man you are going to marry, Harold Whitmore, do you have feelings for him? The question caught Grace off guard. I have never met him. How could I have feelings for him? That is not an answer, Grace sighed. No, I do not have feelings for him beyond a sense of obligation. My father arranged it and I agreed because I had no better options, but I will honor my commitment. I gave my word. Even if you are unhappy, happiness is not guaranteed in life, Warren. You of all people should know that. We do what we must to survive. Warren set down the poker and turned to face her fully. What if there was another option? What if you did not have to go to California? Grace felt her breath catch. What are you saying? I am saying that in the week you have been here, I have come to care for you, more than I should, probably. You are easy to talk to, easy to be around. You work hard and do not complain. You make me laugh. The ranch feels different with you here. It feels like a home instead of just a place I work. Warren. Grace felt tears threaten. I care for you too, but that makes this harder, not easier. I am promised to another man. He is expecting me. I cannot just not appear because I met someone else. Write to him. Explain the situation. I am sure he would understand. Would he? Would you if you were him? If a woman you had never met wrote to say she had changed her mind because she met a cowboy in New Mexico, Grace stood, needing to put distance between them. Besides, what are you offering? We have known each other barely a week. Warren stood as well, closing the distance she had created. I am offering what I should have asked days ago. Stay here, Grace. Not as hired help or as a temporary arrangement. Stay as my wife. Grace felt the world tilt. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long. But I also know that I have not felt this way about anyone since Elizabeth, and what I feel for you is different, stronger. You belong here, Grace. I can feel it, and I think you can too. Grace wanted to deny it, but she could not. Everything he was saying was true. She did feel like she belonged on this ranch in this wild, beautiful place. And she did care for Warren, far more than was wise given the short time they had known each other. What about Harold Whitmore? What about my obligation to him? Send him a telegram. Explain the situation. Offer to repay the money your father took from him for your passage. We will work it out together. And what if he does not accept that? What if he insists I honor the agreement? Warren's jaw tightened. Then we will face that if it happens. But you cannot live your life based on what-ifs, Grace. You have to make a choice about what you want. What I want. Grace felt anger flare through her confusion. What I want is to not have to choose between my honor and my happiness. What I want is to have met you under different circumstances, without obligations hanging over my head. What I want is for this to be simple, but it is not simple, Warren. It is complicated and messy, and I do not know what to do. Warren reached out and took her hands. Then do not decide tonight. Think about it. But while you are thinking, know this. I love you, Grace Katherine. I know it is too soon to say such things, but I do. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you beat me at cards. I love how you look in the morning with your hair messy, and how you sing to the chickens when you think no one is listening. I love you, and I want you to stay. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now. I need time. Take all the time you need. I will be here. Warren released her hands and stepped back. Good night, Grace. He left the room, and Grace heard his bedroom door close quietly. She stood by the fire, shaking, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. Part of her wanted to run after him, to say yes to everything he had offered. But another part, the part that had been raised to value duty and honor above all else, held her back. She went to her room and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Chen's gentle snoring came from the other room, a reminder that she was not alone in the house, even though she felt profoundly alone with her thoughts. The next morning, Warren was polite but distant, giving Grace the space she had asked for. They worked side by side as they had before, but the easy companionship was strained. Mrs. Chen noticed but said nothing, though Grace caught the older woman watching them with a knowing expression. 3 days passed in this manner. Grace threw herself into her work, trying to exhaust herself enough that she would not have to think. But at night, alone in her room, Warren's words echoed in her mind. I love you. I want you to stay. On the 4th day, a rider came from town with a telegram. Grace's hands shook as she opened it, knowing it must be from Harold Whitmore. The message was brief and cold. Expect you to honor agreement. Stage passage already paid. Will pursue legal action if necessary. Arrival expected no later than November 1st. Grace felt sick as she read the words. Legal action. She had not even considered that possibility. Could Harold Whitmore really force her to marry him through the courts? Warren read the telegram over her shoulder, and she heard him curse quietly. This is my fault. I should not have pressured you. Now he is threatening you. He has a right to expect me to honor our agreement, Grace said, though her voice shook. I did give my word. Your word given under duress. Mrs. Chen said from the doorway. Both Grace and Warren jumped, not realizing she was there. The older woman came into the room, her expression serious. I have been listening and watching these past days, and I think it is time someone spoke plainly. Mrs. Chen, this is not your concern, Grace began, but the older woman held up a hand. Nonsense. I am here as chaperone, which means I have a responsibility for your welfare. And what I see is a young woman being forced to choose between an honorable commitment to a stranger who threatens legal action and genuine affection for a good man who is treating her with respect and kindness. She looked at Warren. You love her. Yes, madam. And you? She turned to Grace. Do you love him? Grace felt tears well up. I do not know. Maybe. It has only been 2 weeks. Pa, Mrs. Chen waved a dismissive hand. I knew I loved my husband within 3 days of meeting him. Time means nothing when the heart knows what it wants. The question is not whether you love him. The question is whether you are brave enough to choose your own happiness over obligation to a man who clearly does not care about your happiness. It is not that simple, Grace protested. It is exactly that simple. You just do not want to see it. Mrs. Chen sat down at the table. Let me tell you something, child. I have lived 63 years on this earth. I have known great love and terrible loss. And the one thing I have learned is that we are given very few chances at real happiness in this life. When such a chance appears, you must seize it, or you will regret it for the rest of your days. But the telegram. Harold says he will pursue legal action. Let him try. Warren's voice was firm. I will hire a lawyer if necessary. You agreed to marry him under false pretenses, essentially sold like property because you had no other choice. No judge would force you into a marriage against your will. You do not know that. No, but I am willing to fight for you if you will let me. Warren knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. Grace, please, tell me what you want, not what you think you should do, not what honor or duty demands. What do you want? Grace looked into his eyes, those warm, whiskey-colored eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness since the moment he found her. She thought about the past 2 weeks, about how alive she had felt working beside him, how right it seemed to be here on this land. She thought about the alternative, traveling to California to marry a man who sent cold telegrams threatening legal action instead of words of concern for her well-being. I want to stay, she whispered. I want to stay here with you. Warren's face transformed with joy. He pulled her from the chair and into his arms, holding her tight. Then stay. We will face whatever comes together. Grace clung to him, feeling like a dam had broken inside her. I am scared. I know, so am I, but we will figure it out. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. Will you marry me, Grace Katherine, properly with a church and a preacher and witnesses? Yes. The word came out as a laugh through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. Mrs. Cheng clapped her hands together with satisfaction. Good. Now, the first thing we need to do is send a telegram to this Harold Whitmore making your position clear. And then we need to plan a wedding. How does 3 weeks sound? That gives us time to make a dress and arrange things properly. Warren looked reluctant to release Grace, but he stepped back. 3 weeks sounds perfect. And Mrs. Chen, would you stand up for Grace at the wedding? The older woman's eyes misted over. I would be honored, Mr. Spencer. The telegram to Harold Whitmore was composed with care. Grace explained that she had met and fallen in love with someone else, that she would repay any expenses he had incurred on her behalf, and that she would not be coming to California. Warren added a note at the end stating his intention to marry Grace and his willingness to settle any legal or financial obligations. They sent it that afternoon. And then Warren drove them into Concord to speak with Reverend Matthews about arranging a wedding. The Reverend was a jovial man in his 50s, who seemed delighted by the romantic story of how Warren had rescued Grace. "I have been telling Warren for years that he needed to find himself a good woman," Reverend Matthews said, beaming at them. "Never thought it would happen quite this dramatically, though. The Lord works in mysterious ways." They set the date for November 5th, giving them just over 3 weeks to prepare. As word spread through town, reactions were mixed. Some people thought it was wonderfully romantic. Others, particularly those in Elizabeth Morrison's social circle, whispered about the impropriety of it all. Warren and Grace did their best to ignore the gossips. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Chen revealed an unexpected talent for sewing and began work on a wedding dress, using fabric Warren purchased from the mercantile. Grace divided her time between her regular ranch duties and wedding preparations. Warren seemed to walk around in a state of barely contained happiness, whistling while he worked and finding excuses to be near Grace whenever possible. One evening, about a week before the wedding, Warren asked Grace to take a walk with him after dinner. Mrs. Chen shooed them out with a knowing smile. They walked hand in hand toward the stream that ran through the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When they reached the water's edge, Warren pulled Grace to sit beside him on a fallen log. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Grace opened the box to find a simple gold ring with a small turquoise stone. "Warren, it is beautiful. It was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to the woman I would marry." I know it is not fancy like what Elizabeth had, but Grace stopped his words with a kiss, her first real kiss with him. It was tender and sweet and made her heart race. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "It is perfect. I do not want fancy, Warren. I want real, and this is real." Warren slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you, Grace. I love you too." Saying the words out loud felt like magic, like she was casting a spell that would change everything. "I cannot believe this is happening. 2 weeks ago I was alone and desperate. Now I am about to marry the kindest man I have ever met. I am the lucky one." Warren kissed her forehead. "You could have any man you wanted," Grace laughed. "I am covered in calluses from ranch work, wearing a borrowed dress with no dowry and no family. Most men would not look at me twice. Then most men are fools." Warren pulled her close, and they sat together watching the sunset, neither wanting to break the peaceful moment. The next week brought an unexpected visitor. A lawyer arrived from Santa Fe with papers from Harold Whitmore. Grace's heart sank as she read the legal language threatening breach of promise suit. Warren immediately sent for a lawyer of his own, a friend of his father's named Robert Hayes, who practiced in Albuquerque. Hayes arrived 2 days later, reviewed the papers, and laughed. "This is all bluster and nonsense. You are not legally married to Mr. Whitmore. There was no formal contract beyond correspondence, and you are repaying any financial losses. He has no case. I will write him a response making that clear." The relief was overwhelming. Grace had been terrified that somehow she would be forced to give up Warren and her new life. That night, she and Warren celebrated quietly, sharing a bottle of wine that had belonged to his parents. "This is really happening," Grace said, slightly giddy from the wine and happiness. "We are really getting married. We really are." Warren raised his glass. "To the luckiest man in New Mexico." Grace clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings." The night before the wedding, Mrs. Chen enforced tradition by insisting Warren stay at the boarding house in town. "It is bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony," she declared firmly. Warren grumbled but complied, leaving Grace and Mrs. Chen alone at the ranch. As they sat by the fire that evening, Mrs. Chen working on final adjustments to the wedding dress, Grace found herself thinking about her parents. "I wish my mother and father could be here tomorrow," she said quietly. "They would have liked Warren." "I am sure they are watching," Mrs. Chen said gently. "And I am sure they are happy to see you marrying for love instead of obligation. You think I am doing the right thing? Sometimes I still feel guilty about Harold Whitmore, even though I know logically that I do not owe him anything." Mrs. Chen set down her needle and looked at Grace seriously. "Let me ask you this. If you went through with the original plan, went to California and married Mr. Whitmore, how do you think you would feel every day for the rest of your life?" Grace thought about it honestly. "Sad. Regretful. Like I had given up something precious." "And how do you feel when you think about marrying Warren tomorrow?" A smile spread across Grace's face without her even trying. "Happy, excited, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "There is your answer, child." Mrs. Chen picked up her needle again. "Trust your heart, it knows the way." That night, Grace lay in bed unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of the next day. In less than 24 hours she would be Grace Spencer, wife to a rancher, mistress of this land she had come to love. It felt surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She thought back to her birthday just 3 weeks ago, when she had been alone and desperate, certain she would die in the desert. If someone had told her then that she would soon be married to a kind man who loved her, living on a beautiful ranch in New Mexico, she would not have believed it. Life could change so quickly, for better or worse. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, unseasonably warm for early November. Mrs. Chen helped Grace into the wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Grace's auburn hair was arranged in soft curls, and Mrs. Chen pinned a small spray of wildflowers into it. "You look beautiful," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "Like an angel." Grace looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the radiant woman staring back. "I cannot believe this is me." "Believe it, child. Today is your day." They drove into Concord in the wagon, and Grace felt her heart race as the small church came into view. It seemed like the entire town had turned out for the wedding, curious to see the woman who had captured Warren Spencer's heart so quickly. As Grace walked down the aisle on Mrs. Chen's arm, she saw Warren standing at the altar in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with joy. When his eyes met hers, everything else fell away. The whispers of the gossips, the legal threats from Harold Whitmore, her fears and doubts, all of it disappeared. There was only Warren, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Reverend Matthews performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Warren took Grace's hands and spoke clearly. "I, Warren Spencer, take you, Grace Katherine, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to work beside you and stand by you in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." Grace's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her own vows. "I, Grace Katherine, take you, Warren Spencer, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and cherish you, to work beside you and stand by you in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Warren kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. The small congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, with food contributed by various townspeople. Despite the gossip, most people seemed genuinely happy for the couple. Even Elizabeth Morrison made a brief appearance, though she left quickly after offering stiff congratulations. As the sun began to set, Warren and Grace slipped away from the party and drove back to the ranch, now truly their home together. Mrs. Chen would stay in town for the night, giving them privacy. The house felt different as they entered it together as husband and wife. Warren lit the fire while Grace changed out of her wedding dress and into a simple nightgown. When she emerged from the bedroom, Warren was waiting and he took her hand. "I know today has been overwhelming," he said quietly. "We can take things as slow as you need." Grace smiled and pulled him toward their bedroom. "I do not want slow. I want my husband." That night, they came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, speaking in whispers and gasps. Afterward, Grace lay in Warren's arms, feeling more content than she could remember being in years. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." Warren kissed the top of her head. "You saved me too, you know." This ranch was starting to feel like a prison. Now it feels like paradise. They fell asleep tangled together, and Grace dreamed of the future they would build. The next months passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. Grace learned more about ranching, becoming skilled at tasks she had never imagined doing. She learned to rope cattle, to treat minor injuries and illnesses in the herd, to read the weather and the land. Warren was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging. They worked on improving the ranch together, using the money saved from not having to pay additional help. They dug a new well closer to the house, repaired the barn roof, and built a better fence around the garden to keep out deer and rabbits. In late December, a letter arrived from Harold Whitmore's lawyer, formally withdrawing all legal threats and accepting repayment of his client's expenses. Warren and Grace had worked hard to save the money, and they sent it off with relief and a sense of finally closing that chapter of their lives. Christmas that year was simple but joyful. Grace cooked a special dinner, and they exchanged small gifts. Warren gave her a beautiful saddle he had been working on in secret, with her initials tooled into the leather. Grace gave him a warm coat she had sewn, and a set of books she had ordered from a catalog. They spent the evening by the fire, reading aloud to each other and making plans for the coming year. In February, Grace realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she thought it was just the stress and hard work, but when another month passed, she began to suspect the truth. Mrs. Chen, who had returned to the ranch after giving the newlyweds a month alone, confirmed her suspicions with one knowing look. "You are with child," the older woman said matter-of-factly. "I can see it in your face. When did you last have your courses?" Grace calculated and felt her eyes widen. "Not since before the wedding, nearly 4 months ago." "Have you told Warren?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure." That evening, Grace made Warren's favorite meal and waited until they were sitting by the fire to tell him. "Warren, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the harness he was mending. "What is it?" Grace took a deep breath. "I am going to have a baby, in late summer, I think." Warren's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, joy, fear, and finally pure happiness. He dropped the harness and pulled Grace into his arms. "A baby, truly, truly." Grace laughed as he spun her around. "Mrs. Cheng confirmed it today. We are going to be parents." Warren set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "You should sit down. You should not be standing so much. Do you need anything? Water? Food?" Grace laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I am fine, Warren. Women have babies all the time. I am not fragile." But Warren could not be convinced to let her do heavy work anymore. He took over all the tasks he deemed too strenuous, despite Grace's protests that she was perfectly capable. Mrs. Chen finally intervened, explaining that Grace needed exercise and activity to stay healthy, just not anything too demanding. As spring arrived and Grace's belly began to swell noticeably, Warren became even more attentive. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was perfectly smooth. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for their child's arrival. In June, Sarah arrived from Denver with her husband and children for a visit. Warren's sister took one look at Grace and squealed with delight. "I am going to be an aunt again. Warren, why did you not tell me sooner?" "We wanted to wait until we were certain everything was all right," Warren explained, embracing his sister. "Grace, this is Sarah. Sarah, my wife Grace." The two women took to each other immediately. Sarah was warm and funny, with her brother's kind eyes and an easy laugh. Her children, a boy of 5 and a girl of 3, were delightful, and Grace enjoyed watching Warren play uncle, giving them rides on his shoulders and teaching them to feed the chickens. "He will be a wonderful father," Sarah told Grace one afternoon as they watched Warren chase the children around the yard. "He has always wanted a family of his own." "Did he talk about it?" "Before we met," Sarah nodded. "After Elizabeth left him, he became convinced he would be alone forever. I worried about him out here by himself. But then your letter came, telling us about the wedding, and I could hear the happiness in every word. You are good for him, Grace. He is good for me too. I was lost before I met him in more ways than one." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I am so glad he found you. You both deserve happiness." The visit lasted a week, and when Sarah and her family left, Grace found herself excited about having children in the house again someday. Their own child would have cousins to play with, a family to belong to. As summer progressed and Grace's belly grew larger, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Dr. Morrison, who maintained his practice in Concord despite his wife's connection to Warren's past, came out to the ranch to check on Grace regularly. He pronounced her healthy and predicted the baby would arrive in late August or early September. Grace's labor began on a hot afternoon in late August. Warren immediately rode for town to fetch Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Chen, who had returned to her boarding house for the summer but had promised to come for the birth. Grace labored through the afternoon and into the night, with Mrs. Cheng coaching her and Warren pacing outside the bedroom door. Finally, in the early hours of August 28th, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry and a head full of dark hair like his father's. "You have a son," Dr. Morrison announced, handing the baby to Grace. "A healthy, strong son." Grace looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. When Warren was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with tears streaming down his face. "Our son," Grace whispered, holding the baby out to him. Warren took the child with shaking hands, staring down at him with wonder. "He is perfect, Grace, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names but had not made a final decision. Warren thought for a moment, then smiled. "William, after my father, William Spencer. William Spencer." Grace tried out the name and found it fit perfectly. "Hello, William. Welcome to the world." The first months of William's life were exhausting and wonderful. Grace had never known such tiredness, but she had also never known such joy. Warren was a devoted father, waking with her for night feedings, walking the floor with William when he cried, showing a patience and gentleness that made Grace fall even more in love with him. As William grew, they established a new rhythm on the ranch. Grace would work while Mrs. Chen, who had returned to help with the baby, watched William. Warren would come in from the fields to hold his son and play with him, marveling at every small development. On October 15th, Grace's birthday and the anniversary of the day Warren had found her, they had a small celebration. Mrs. Chen baked a cake, and Warren presented Grace with a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For writing down your thoughts," he explained. "I know these past 2 years have been quite a journey. Thought you might want to record it all for William to read someday." Grace hugged him tightly. "It is perfect. Thank you." She looked around at the warm kitchen, at the baby sleeping peacefully in his cradle, at this life they had built together. 2 years ago today, I thought I was going to die alone in the desert. I never could have imagined I would end up here this happy. Warren kissed her forehead. "I remember that day so clearly, seeing you on that trail, so brave despite everything you had been through. I think I started falling in love with you then, even though I did not realize it yet. I was terrified when I saw you riding toward me. I thought you might be another bandit. Instead, you got me," Warren smiled. "Not sure if that is better or worse." Grace swatted his arm playfully. "Much better, infinitely better." She looked at him seriously. "Warren, I need you to know something. I am happy, truly, deeply happy. This life, this ranch, you and William, it is everything I could have wanted and things I did not even know I wanted. Thank you for being stubborn enough to ask me to stay. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes." Warren pulled her close, and they stood together in the kitchen they had shared for 2 years, surrounded by the life they had built. As the months passed, William grew from a baby into a toddler, walking and then running around the ranch with endless energy. He followed his father everywhere, imitating his walk and trying to help with every task. Grace watched them together and felt her heart swell with love. In the spring of 1890, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less surprising but no less joyful. Warren was thrilled at the prospect of another child, and William, now approaching 2 years old, was told he would be a big brother. Their daughter, Emma Grace Spencer, was born in November of that year, arriving on a cold but clear day. She had Grace's auburn hair and Warren's whiskey-colored eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "2 children," Warren marveled, holding Emma while William climbed onto his lap to see his new sister. "We have 2 beautiful children." Grace watched her family from the bed, exhausted but content. "We are blessed." The years that followed were full of the normal challenges and joys of raising children and running a ranch. There were hard winters when money was tight and they worried about the herd. There were good years when cattle prices rose and they could afford improvements to the property. Through it all, Grace and Warren faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. William grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Emma was spirited and bold, insisting on learning to ride almost before she could walk properly. Grace often found her daughter in the barn, talking to the horses and trying to climb into saddles meant for adults. On Grace's 30th birthday in 1894, Warren surprised her with a small party. Sarah and her family had come down from Denver. Mrs. Chen was there, and several friends from town attended. As Grace looked around at the people gathered in their home, at her children playing with their cousins, at her husband smiling at her across the crowded room, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Grace and Warren sat on the porch watching the sunset. 7 years had passed since that October day when Warren had found her on the trail. 7 years of building a life together. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked quietly. "Giving up your original plans? Sometimes I wonder if you think about what your life might have been like if you had made it to California." Grace took his hand. "Never. Not once. That life would have been safe, perhaps, but empty. This life with you, with our children, with this land, it is full. It is rich. It is everything." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Warren Spencer. You saved me from dying in that desert, but you also saved me from a half-life of going through the motions without real love or purpose." "You saved me too," Warren said. "I was so lonely before you came. I had convinced myself that I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone, but I was lying to myself. This ranch is not just a place I work anymore. It is a home, because you made it one. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Grace thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The tragedy of losing her parents, the desperation that led her to accept Harold Whitmore's proposal, the stage robbery that could have ended her life, but instead brought her to exactly where she needed to be. "I have been thinking about something," Warren said, breaking the silence. "William is 6 now, almost old enough to really help with the ranch. And Emma is 4, into everything. They are growing up so fast. I know. Sometimes I wish I could slow time down. Me too, but I was thinking maybe we should consider expanding, not just the ranch but our family." "What would you think about having another child?" Grace smiled in the darkness. "Funny you should mention that. I have been meaning to tell you something." Warren turned to look at her. "Grace Katherine Spencer, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that come spring, William and Emma will have another little brother or sister to boss around." Warren let out a whoop of joy and pulled Grace into his arms, kissing her soundly. "3 children. We are going to have 3 children." Their third child, a son they named Thomas after Grace's father, was born in early May of 1895. The birth was easier than the previous 2, and Thomas was a calm, easy baby from the start. William took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to hold the baby and help care for him. Emma was less interested in the new arrival, more concerned with learning to ride her pony without assistance. As the century drew to a close, the ranch prospered. Cattle prices stabilized, and Warren's careful management and hard work paid off. They were able to hire 2 permanent ranch hands, easing the burden on Warren and allowing him more time with his family. Grace kept the books and managed the household, raised their children, and worked alongside Warren when needed. The turn of the century in 1900 was celebrated with a big party at the ranch. All their friends and family gathered to mark the occasion. Sarah and her family were there, Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, and many of the people from Concord who had become dear friends over the years. As the clock struck midnight, Warren raised his glass. "To the new century, and to the woman who changed my life and made all of this possible, to my wife, Grace." Everyone cheered and drank, and Grace felt tears of happiness sting her eyes. She looked around at her children, now 9, 8, and 5, at the home they had built, at the life they had created from nothing but chance and choice and love. Later, when the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Grace wrote in the journal Warren had given her years ago. She wrote about the party, about the joy of celebrating with people they loved, about her gratitude for the strange path that had led her here. Then she flipped back to the first page, to the entry she had made on her 24th birthday, the first one after marrying Warren. She read her younger self's words about being found when she was lost, about choosing love over obligation, about the terrifying joy of building a new life. "No regrets," she whispered, closing the journal. "Not a single one." The years continued to pass, bringing the normal joys and sorrows of life. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1902, and Grace and Warren mourned the woman who had been both friend and mother figure to them. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own personality and interests. William proved to be a natural rancher, working alongside his father from a young age and showing a gift for handling cattle. Emma surprised everyone by developing a passion for breeding horses, showing an uncanny ability to train even the most spirited animals. Young Thomas took after his mother, preferring books to cattle, and showing a gift for numbers that made him invaluable for managing the ranch's accounts. In 1905, on Grace's 41st birthday, Warren organized another surprise. The children led her outside where a brand new house stood, larger than the original cabin, built by Warren and the ranch hands over the past months. "I know the old house was getting cramped with 3 growing children," Warren explained as Grace stood speechless. "Figured it was time we had a proper place. What do you think?" Grace walked through the new house, marveling at the spacious kitchen, the large parlor, the 4 bedrooms upstairs. "Warren, it is beautiful. How did you keep this secret? Lots of sneaking around while you were in town." Warren grinned. The kids helped, though Emma nearly gave it away about 6 times. That evening, their first in the new house, the family gathered in the parlor. Warren played his harmonica while the children sang. Grace looked at her family, at these people she loved more than anything, and felt a deep sense of peace. "Tell us the story again," Emma begged, as she often did. "About how you and Papa met." Grace and Warren exchanged a smile. They had told this story countless times, but the children never tired of it. "Well," Grace began, settling into her chair. "It was October 15th, 1887. I was 23 years old and I was alone on my birthday, walking through the desert with no water, no food, and no hope. I had been robbed and left for dead by bandits, and I thought my life was over." "But then Papa found you," William interjected, knowing the story by heart but still eager to hear it. "But then your Papa found me," Grace confirmed. "He was just a lonely rancher, riding his horse through the canyon when he saw me about to collapse. He saved my life that day. And then he fell in love with you," Emma sighed dramatically. "And then we fell in love with each other," Warren corrected gently. "It did not happen all at once. It took time. But your mother was brave enough to choose love over obligation, and I was lucky enough that she chose me. And then you got married and had us," Thomas finished the story. "And then we got married and had you," Grace agreed. "The 3 most wonderful children in the world." "Tell us what you were thinking when you first saw Mama," Emma demanded of her father. Warren laughed. "I thought she was the bravest person I had ever seen. Even though she was clearly terrified and exhausted, she stood there with her chin up, trying to look like she did not need help. I knew right then that she was someone special." "And what did you think of Papa?" William asked his mother. "I thought he was going to rob me," Grace admitted, making the children giggle. "But then he offered me water and caught me when I fainted, and I realized he was kind. Later, I realized he was so much more than just kind. He was exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed him." As the children's questions continued, Grace met Warren's eyes across the room. In that look was everything they had built together, all the years of joy and struggle, all the love that had grown from that chance encounter in the desert. Eventually, the children went to bed, leaving Grace and Warren alone in their new parlor. Warren pulled Grace close, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. "18 years," Warren murmured. "18 years since I found you on that trail. 18 years since you made sure I was never alone again," Grace replied. "The best 18 years of my life. Mine, too." Warren kissed her softly. "Think we will make it another 18? I think we will make it 50 more if we are lucky." Grace rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you, Warren Spencer, more than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too, Grace Spencer, forever and always." They stood together in their new house, in the life they had built from courage and kindness and love. Outside, the New Mexico night was vast and beautiful, filled with stars. Inside, they had everything they needed. Each other, their children, their home. Grace had been alone on her 23rd birthday, lost and desperate. But Warren, the lonely rancher, had found her and made sure she was never alone again. Together, they had built something beautiful out of chance and choice, something that would last for all their days and beyond. It was, Grace thought as she held her husband close, the best possible ending. Or rather, the best possible beginning, for their love story had no ending. It would continue through their children and their children's children, a legacy of choosing love over fear, of taking chances, of believing that sometimes the worst days can lead to the very best lives. And as they stood together in their home, surrounded by the evidence of their love and their labor, Grace Katherine Spencer knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again and again. To stay with this man on this land, building this life. She had been saved in the desert, yes, but more importantly, she had been found. And in being found, she had finally come home,